about that. So you'll see it develop as I develop it. So the topics we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about stress, and we're going to talk about the herb ashwagandha. I'm going to talk stress in a little bit lighter atmosphere than I did on Wednesday. Wednesday, I got really into the nitty gritty of what it is. I'm going to talk a little bit about the hormones and how it affects us. And hormones, there's stress hormones, so cortisol. You can say adrenaline is part of the stress hormones, not necessarily in a bad way, but it can be in a bad way. And then the sex hormones, which are testosterone for men, we have a little bit, and then we have estrogen and progesterone. So I'll talk a little bit of the relationship with the stress and sex hormones also, because it is a huge part of our mood and our stress levels if our estrogen and progesterone levels or testosterone levels are thrown off. And I'm speaking generally to men and women, so it doesn't matter where you come from, because we all are affected by stress, and it affects us in the same way, but our way of dealing with it, or way of processing it, is different. For women, we need to shut down, we need to rest. Although movement does help, but movement that is excessive is actually going to cause more stress and more depletion. Where if we're a man needs to do like get in the dirt, fix an engine, clean the garage type stuff, because that actually boosts testosterone, along with, of course, having sex. Where for women, when we have sex, it actually depletes our testosterone level, or our estrogen, progesterone levels. But the snuggling afterward releases oxytocin, which helps estrogen and progesterone. So it's kind of ironic. We have those things that link us together. One of them depletes us, one of it energizes us, and then the other does the opposite, because oxytocin actually lowers testosterone levels. So it's kind of funny how that works. Hormones are really very entertaining. And I have a whole lecture on hormones, I think, coming up in a few weeks. I have to look at my schedule again, because my February I have to schedule yet, except for next week. Next week is sleep. So we have stress. So we have good stress and we have bad stress. I'm sure we've all heard of this. So the good stress means that our body releases a little bit of adrenaline. We become very focused. It closes down our systems a little bit, releases a little bit of cortisol, but not to the extent that an actual stress does. So when we have negative stress or perceived stress, so we have the negative stress of perceived stress, where we make it up in our head and it really doesn't exist. Our worry, our fears, that kind of stuff creates a perceived stress, what we think might happen in the future. Real stress would be like getting in a car accident, a death in the family, divorce. All of that kind of stuff would be real stress. But we want those things to eventually come to an end. When our stress levels stay at a high level, what happens, and I'm giving a very short, fuzzy version of this because it's way more elaborate, but the short, fuzzy version is that when our stress levels rise, what happens is our body will go to our adrenals. So our mind will tell our adrenals that I need energy. However you can get it, I have to have it. And the adrenals are not the brightest little glands in our body. They don't have any power to be able to make decisions. Their only decision is very linear. Find cortisol and release it as quickly as possible. So if our adrenals are functioning properly and we're healthy and we have normal stress levels, meaning we have a little bit of stress, but it isn't something that's looming on us all the time, it releases its cortisol and it does its thing and runs its course. But if we are constantly fatigued, and we have what's called, it's becoming a very common phrase now, the adrenal fatigue or adrenal failure, our adrenals aren't working or they're tired. And this is becoming, I believe, an epidemic of a sort. And it's leading to a lot of burnout, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So we're releasing cortisol constantly because of our perceived stress, the stress that we're making up in our life, not the real stuff that car accident, death, divorce, even marriage, like change in job. That's all good stress for a period of time. And that's why we create tools to be able to manage that stress. But when we're living in a world of perceived stress, where we're constantly feeling stressed out because we're perceiving life to be stressful. And granted, I get it. This has been a weird year. And most of us have had significant lifestyle changes, if not a completely flippant life. Mine completely flipped. I closed my yoga studios and now I'm all online, which is a complete shift. But I am so thankful for the opportunity, because I would not be doing this stuff. I'd be trying to save a yoga studio right now, which I'm not having to do at all. I'm reviving something completely different. So stressful situation, COVID happened, I closed my studio. It was very sad. I mourned for months, six to 8 months. I mourned the loss of this thing that I had for 20 years. And then things came alive. And then I saw the opportunities within that stress. So it turned the stress into a positive change. And yes, it's a lot of work, but it's all building for a life that I've dreamed of my whole life. And now I know what I want. I want to be able to teach from anywhere in the world. And I can do that now. So when we perceive stress, so if I was constantly lingering on, oh, I should have did this, I should have did this, I should have did this, and right, we get the shoulda, coulda, wouldas, and we call it the shoulda shoulders, where we should have did all this in our life, and our shoulders get tight. Yeah, we joke about that in yoga therapy about the should have shoulders. When people have really tight shoulders, neck, and jaw, it's because they should have did something else in their life. But anyway, we get into these shouldas. I should have, I could have, I would have, all type situations, and our mind creates worries and fears. And then our cortisol is being released all the time, to the point where our adrenals go, I don't have any more. I'm out. I'm really out. Like, where can I go now? So one of the areas it goes to is it goes to our thyroid. Other area goes to our reproductive system, and then the other is it messes with our sugar levels. So I'll talk a little bit about the thyroid, because there is a lot of thyroid issues in this country, and it's getting to be worse and worse and worse because of our external environment causing fatigue on our thyroid, and our iodine levels not being able to manage that. And that's a whole nother lecture that I'll talk about another time. But short fuzzy version is it steals from our thyroid. So if it steals from our thyroid, it's stealing hormones, abilities, that kind of stuff from our thyroid. The next place it goes, and I'll talk more about this one, is the reproductive system. So our reproductive system isn't just the process of producing other humans. It's also the process of managing our energy levels and managing our mental and emotional levels, right? For those of us that are a little bit older, so we're not necessarily in our 20s and 30s, but we're in our 40s, 50s, 60s, and so on. We went through menopause, we're going through perimenopause. So if you're 35 plus, you're going through perimenopause. No matter what Western medicine says, it starts to change after 35, 40 years old. Things are just different. And that's why women have a little more difficulty getting pregnant after 35 and 40 than they would if they were in their early 20s. And a lot of that is accumulated stress over time. But so our body, our adrenals will go search for other areas. The reproductive system is one of the main ones. And the reproductive system, what it does in the female body is it'll take from progesterone. Well, progesterone's job is to manage estrogen. So I'm sure some of us have heard the terminology estrogen dominant. Oh, I'm estrogen dominant. Well, yeah, sure. But what it really means is that progesterone is not managing estrogen, because progesterone is like that sidekick that says, hey, yo, estrogen, you're a little too high. Let's balance this out a little bit. And also estrogen and progesterone work together to be able to build the uterine lining, to be able to hold a child. So when we're going through our cycle, our 28-day cycle, we start at the bottom and then we build up to our ovulation. So our body is building the uterine lining. So estrogen builds things in our body. It builds masses, it builds uterine tissue, it builds in our body. So it can be a good thing, but when it's building masses and tumors and cysts, it's not a good thing. So that's where the estrogen dominance takes place. Progesterone's job is to keep it managed in one area in the uterus. So creating good structure in the uterus and not creating things like fibroids. And that's the imbalance of too much estrogen and likely not enough progesterone in our body. And one of the reasons we don't have that progesterone in our body is because our adrenals are stealing it to be able to convert it into cortisol, because it's easily turned into anything. That's the thing about progesterone, is it can turn into estrogen and it can turn into cortisol. So it's an adaptive hormone in our body. Our body has a few of those, that there's these hormones that it has that can turn into other hormones, which is absolutely fascinating when you think about it, because that is a pretty elite system to be able to create other hormones within the system. Like, human anatomy is the most fascinating thing in the world, and female anatomy is even more so, because ours is 10 times more complex because of the different juggle of hormones at specific times of the day, at specific times of the month, which makes it even more fascinating. And I have a whole lecture on female hormones coming up in a couple of weeks. But so if it steals from our reproductive system, then our reproductive system can't produce properly. So it steals from our reproductive system or our thyroid to be able to produce cortisol and then uses that for it. What happens when we run out of that? We just get extremely fatigued and more fatigued, more moody. Our body goes into a burnout. So this is where our body is depleted. And in Ayurveda, we would talk about ojas. Ojas is our vitality, our very essence of life. It is the finest material of life. So in Ayurveda, we talk about the system. So our systems in Ayurveda are a little bit different than the systems in Western medicine. Western looks at the reproductive system, the digestive system, the respiratory system, the circulatory system. And that's great because it gives you pinpoints to be able to work on. Ayurveda looks at more platform points. So we have the lymphatic system, which would be the top, and then we go into muscles, bones, we go into the fat tissue, we go into the nervous system. Reproductive system is the last system that gets fed when we eat food. So about 40 days later, it gets fed. So it's the finer materials that feed our finer, more delicate systems like our nervous system, reproductive system. And the last essence is ojas. So it's the finest material that our body creates, which creates longevity. So if we're depleting our system to the point where it can't feed our reproductive system to be able to produce the proper hormones, and then we don't have any vitality or ojas, burnout happens. And this is where it affects our sleep cycle. It affects our reproductive system, our immune system, which are the most important things to be able to live. This is the ironic part. So we go into fight or flight, whether it be a perceived fight or flight, meaning we create anxiety and fear, or we go into a real fight or flight situation where we're chased by a bear. How many of us have been chased by a bear? Not too many, right? I've been chased by a bull. That's a whole different ballgame and pretty much like a bear. And you move pretty much like you would from a bear because it's very scary. But not many of us have even been chased by a bull. Maybe Luann has. But being chased by a bull is a pretty scary experience. But also getting in a car accident or going through a divorce or a big change in life is a scary experience. Completely legitimate to be fatigued, tired, exhausted after something like that. But being able to rebuild is the idea. Perceived stress is unnecessary, but unfortunately our minds are wired for negativity. Wired for negativity. Did you hear what I said? Like, we're wired for negativity. What does this mean? This means, it doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It's the way we're wired to be able to protect ourselves. So if our body goes into fight or flight, whether it's real or perceived, it doesn't know the difference. Our mind cannot decipher the difference between the bear or bull or our perceived worry of something that could happen way off in the future that we have no control over right now. Cannot decipher the difference. So it releases the same hormones in the same order. And the idea is to be able to stop that from happening. And when it does happen, it shuts off our immune system. It shuts off our digestive system, or at least minimizes it significantly. It also affects our sleep because we don't need to reproduce. We don't need to be able to digest food. We don't need to have an immune system except for if we get injured. And we don't need to be able to sleep to get away from the bear or bull. So our body shuts down those systems, puts all of our blood into our external limbs to be able to fight or flight, to be able to flee away from the issue. Okay. So if it's a perceived stress, we really don't need all our blood in our external limbs. We definitely need our immune system. We definitely, we need sex because that's actually a connection point. If we have a partner, if we're in a relationship, we need that connection point, but it shuts that down. And we need to be able to digest food to be able to survive, especially if it's long-term. So stress causes these really, it's a snowball effect, right? We start feeling stressed, we get more stressed, we get more stressed, we get more angry, we create more situations within our work environment, within our life environment, situations with friends. All of that kind of stuff is a snowball effect from our stress level. And most of it's perceived. Most of the things in life, and I'm sure you hear this all the time. I mean, most of us are in some sort of self-help personal growth, whatever function we do, religious practice, tells us you gotta work on your stress management. Well, yeah, that's great, but how? How do we work on our stress management? And part of it is that we look at what are the things in our life that bring us joy? What are the things in our life that create more balance in our life? What do we like to do? And we say, oh, I don't have time for that. Well, you better start making time, because eventually it's going to turn into something worse than just a cold or flu. It's going to turn into something more life-threatening like cancer. And then what? Then what are you going to do? You're going to have to go through treatments if that's your choice, or you die. And that's not I don't look at that as the alternative. I look at it as, what can I do now? And especially after I turned 40, it was like, and it's not so much the age as it was something shifted in my life. And I looked at my life and said, what do I really want to do here? Who do I really want to be? And that's part of habit changing too, or creating habits, is who do you really want to be? Do you want to be this person that's stressed out, fatigued, exhausted, can't hang out with your kids, your grandkids, your friends, because you're too tired and sitting in front of the TV to get your energy? And another thing is most of the time, if we can't sleep to be able to recharge, it's not because we are wound up at the end of the night. It is because we are so exhausted, our body doesn't even know how to handle it. Our body doesn't even know how to deal with stress anymore. It doesn't even know the difference between perceived stress and real stress anyway. It can't manage it all on its own. So what we need to do is really be able to create a foundation for our life. And one of the things is, and I'm a huge believer in Ayurvedic medicine, because the idea of it is getting to the root cause of things, but mainly the root cause of things is our disconnect from nature, really, and from our true selves, and our connection with spiritual faith and all of that. Like, there's a whole bunch of different things that wrap up in that bundle of creating a positive life. But one of the things is creating routine in your life. And I preach this all the time in my lectures, and you'll see this numerous times if you watch any of my YouTube stuff or do any of my programs. Routine is key. And I get it all the time. Oh, I don't need routine. Okay, you could let me know when you turn 50, 55, 60, because guaranteed you're going to feel the repercussions from not having routine at that point in time in your life. You're going to be sick. You're going to be overweight. You're going to have a crazy menopause. If not, you'll have a weird postmenopause. Or if you're younger in life, you might have PMS or menstrual issues, or no sex drive at 35, and that's not normal. All right. Reproductive issues are not a normal thing, although they are fairly common nowadays. So creating routine in your life. I suggest starting your evening off right. So the evening is where the next day starts. If you've already started your day, you've already set foot for what's happened. Like, if you wake up late, it's probably because you went to bed too late. You ate too much food too late at night. You ate sugar or drank caffeine too far in the day. So think of your next day. So my day tomorrow is what I do today. All right. So think about that. Look at, what do you do the night before you go to bed? That book, I have a philosophy called the bookend philosophy, is how you start your day and how you end your day should be the same. And I know there's some people that work night shifts, and there is ways to be able to work around this and create balance there. You do it a little bit differently, and it takes a little more teamwork with a practitioner and a lot of questions and looking at different options. But for most of us, we can create a pretty normal circadian type lifestyle. And eating before 6 o'clock is one of them, and not eating anything else afterwards, unless you're going to do something like golden milk, which is turmeric and a little bit of honey and some herbs and spices. And it's absolutely lovely. It's like dessert right before you go to bed. And that's the one thing in Ayurveda we actually recommend, because we're huge on no food after 6. Nothing else unless you want to do a little bit of tea. But golden milk is one of the things we recommend, because milk has sedative properties in it. So it can actually help you sleep. And I'll talk more about that actually next week. Another thing is making sure that you're going to bed the same time. So going to bed 10 o'clock is a cutoff point, and I have a whole lecture on why, but 10 o'clock is the best time, and getting up, around 6 o'clock, if not earlier. So I'll talk about more of those in other lectures that I teach on Ayurveda. Also, making sure that you're doing some sort of self-care. And often we think of self-care as pampering. And pampering is fine, and that's great, like getting a massage or getting your nails done or your hair done, like all that stuff is fine, but that's not true self-care. So I wrote an article on my website, so whenshifthappens.org, and I have an article about self-care. And self-care is not glamorous. It's not all these glamorous things that we think self-care is. Self-care is the day-to-day stuff that makes you feel better, that makes you feel alive. And it takes time to build routines. If you can say, oh yeah, there's lots of research around routine and building habits, right? They say, oh, it takes 30 days. Oh, it takes 26 days. Oh, it takes, 34 days. Well, that's not entirely true. It depends on the depth of the habit. So if the habit has, it takes a little bit more, there's a little more resistance creating it, or if it's inconsistent, it's going to take a lot longer. I would say a true habit probably takes between 3 and 6 months to be able to create, and doing it every single day in some way, shape, or form. So that means exercise, that means nutrition. But at the same time, there's ways to be able to cater it. And that's what Ayurveda offers, is so many options in being able to make the lifestyle that you're looking for. And then realizing when you're overworking. So some of us are going to tend to be more workaholic types. In Ayurveda, we talk about Vata, Pitta, Kapha. Kaphas are the workhorses. They like doing their work, but they can cut off, and they usually have a job that they work for somebody, and then they can cut off, go home, and be done with it. They work very hard, though. They're very hard workers when they're not lazy. And then Pittas tend to overwork and burn out. Like, we're the drive it until it's dead, and then dead some more. And then the Vatas, well, they'll sometimes just forget to go to work, for one thing, but they tend to be more of the creative types. And all the qualities have good and bad qualities to them. But we're talking about overworking, and usually this is more of the Pitta type, or the Kapha type can be that way too, where you just work to the point that you're almost not productive. Vatas can do this too. I shouldn't even leave them out, because they tend to be the most unproductive type when their energy is not channeled. So realize, are you overworking and being productive, or are you overworking and distracted half the time by these devices that we have? How many times do you look at your phone? Do you realize it takes you about 12 minutes to get refocused back on a project once you get distracted? How many times do you do that during the day? They say we look at our phones at least 60 times a day. That's 60 distractions during the day. So creating habits to be able to not overwork creates more time to be able to do other things that you enjoy. So working hard is not what I'm not saying don't work hard. That is completely opposite, because I would be a complete hypocrite if I said that. I work hard, and I work a lot, but I absolutely love my job, and my job is is so intertwined in my life that it's hard to separate it. Even when I go on vacation, part of my job is taking photos and doing that. And I'm getting to love it more and more and more the more that I do it, because I'm seeing how I can help other people through my day-to-day, my really ordinary life with my chickens and my dog, and living in the city and being out in the woods. So realize the things that you really enjoy, and sometimes just writing those things down, like, what do I really love? What would my perfect life look like? And then looking at that. So that's some of the ideas around stress and being able to work with that. I work with clients. That's my thing, and helping them along their journey. And some of you that are on right now have worked with me before. And in the last year, I did so much studying. COVID was a complete blessing for me as far as studying. And I've studied a lot of stuff. My next venture is going into fatigue and studying more about fatigue, now that stress is kind of an easy conversation for me, but going into the fatigue. So in the next month, you're going to see a lot more talks about fatigue and what that means, and vitality and what that means. But we'll talk about the last topics. The last topic is ashwagandha. So ashwagandha translates as the something that's strong as a horse. So it's a herb that's known strong as a horse. And we say, when we talk about ashwagandha in school, we say not just strength of a horse, but smell of a horse. So any of you that have smelled like a horse barn, if you smell ashwagandha, you'll laugh because it smells a lot like that. Unfortunately, it's not the best tasting herb, but fortunately, it's really easy to mask. That's why I'm trying to create this tea right now. It's like, okay, this isn't working. I've got to figure out something else. And I'm pretty good at creating teas out of really bad herbs, but ashwagandha is a pretty potent one. But ashwagandha, strength of a horse. And initially it was used more so for the reproductive system. So that's what a lot of research, it is the most researched herb in Eastern medicine and in the Western culture. So Western medicine has did an extensive amount of research on ashwagandha, which is a benefit to us because we're a big pusher of ashwagandha because it's such a beautiful herb. But it's usually used for the male reproductive system specifically. We use shatavari or shatavari for women's health, and we use ashwagandha for men's. But we're finding more and more that ashwagandha is benefiting women also for reproductive health. And that's because of all the other properties that it holds in managing stress and then releasing toxins from our body. So it's become an herb that's a little bit more than what we ever expected it to be. Although in Eastern medicine, you can read the old Vedas and they talk about all these things. Western medicine is proving all of the things that we've been talking about for 4,000 or 5,000 years. So it's a benefit to us. So another thing that it focuses on is improving endurance and stamina. And there's been a lot of research around endurance and stamina with athletes and increasing stamina of lung and breathing. We've did some research lately with ashwagandha and the immune system. And so that's pretty significant considering the illnesses that are going around right now. I'm a big promoter of vitamin D. I do think vitamin D is hands down the best essence that we can be taking in on a consistent basis, especially in the winter in the northern climates. But ashwagandha would be right there with it. And ashwagandha is a fall harvested herb. It's a root herb. So traditionally it was put in soups and stews and stuff like that in the winter for immunity, vitality, and that kind of stuff. When you take it in the summer and in the spring, it's nice to be able to add a little bit of ginger to it because it helps balance it out and make it easier to digest. Because in the winter, our digestive system is pretty strong. It's the time of year where we tend to eat foods that are harder to digest, like wheat and gluten, root vegetables, and meat. And Ayurveda, we talk about meat. We're usually vegetarian, but some of us eat some meat, and usually it's seasonal or as a medicine. So wintertime, our digestive system is better. In springtime, our digestive system is hands down the worst. So we want to make sure that we're using foods that are much easier to digest. In summer, foods are usually easier to digest also because it's pre-cooked by the sun. But ginger helps to be able to make it easier to digest in the other seasons. So you can have ashwagandha year round. You can take ashwagandha on a consistent basis. I take ashwagandha with my mood and with my immunity. So I take it way more in the winter and in the darker months. And then in the spring, I kind of cut down, if not completely cut it out. And then a little bit in the summertime, but I switch between that and shatavari. It's also known as a rasayana. So in Ayurveda, rasayana means longevity or the practice of longevity, the medicine of longevity. So it's a highly regarded herb in Eastern medicine. Let's see. I want to make sure that I'm covering everything. One of the things that makes ashwagandha very unique is its adaptogen. So this means that it adapts to what you need. So during the day, it can help give you energy, but it's a stable energy. It's not like drinking coffee. It's a very stable energy. And it's not going to be anything you're going to notice significantly. It's pretty subtle. And then at the nighttime, it helps our body to go into that phase of winding down. So what it does is it links with the solar cycle. So we call it circadian science. So the cycle of the sun, moon, the day-night cycle. And Ayurveda is huge on that. We've We've been studying it for a long time. It's been a Nobel Peace Prize winner, was the study of circadian science in 2017. Never mind, we've been talking about it for about 4,000 or 5,000 years, but it's been proven by Western medicine that circadian science is the new science. Thank goodness for Ayurvedics, because we've been doing it for a while and we can help people through this process. So ashwagandha actually helps us connect with the daylight cycle. So during the day, it helps give us energy. During the night, it helps us to wind down and feel heavy. And that's because the root property in it. The root property is grounding during the day, so stable energy, and then helps us to sleep. It's not a sedative though. So that's what makes it a little bit different, is it's not a sedative drug. It's not like melatonin's more specifically used to be able to go to sleep, although melatonin is definitely not a sleep aid. What it does is it tells our daytime shift workers to shut off, so our daytime systems to shut off, and it activates our nighttime systems and tells them to get to work. So melatonin is not, it's not a sleep aid either. What it does, it tells our systems what to do. I'll talk about that more next week. And then there's also been some research around it, using it as a, digestive isn't quite the right word, but for our body's hormones in digestion. So we have these two hormones called leptin and ghrelin, and ghrelin makes us hungry and leptin helps to sedate us. And when we eat at certain times, when we eat 9 o'clock in the morning, about noon, and then about 6 o'clock, every single day, our body knows exactly what to do. It knows it needs to release ghrelin at about 8 o'clock in the morning to make us feel hungry. It knows it needs to release leptin after we get done eating to sedate us so we're not hungry again. And this helps to create consistency. What ashwagandha does, and this was fascinating because this is brand new research, what ashwagandha does is it actually helps us with that process. So it helps to make us less leptin sensitive. So people that are overweight and have inconsistent schedules tend to be leptin sensitive, meaning they feel hungry often and snack and eat often. Kind of a habitual cycle, right? If you're overweight and you don't have a sedation process, meaning your leptin is not activating to be able to say, hey, yo, you're full, you're done eating, you don't need any more food. That's an issue, right? So if we're eating at consistent times, our hormones can work together. Our body really wants to work as little as possible so it can do its other things, like think about things, have cognitive clarity. If our body is constantly trying to figure out what we're going to put in it, or when we're going to do things, it doesn't do as well because it's got to be able to multitask, which I don't know. Anybody who says they're good at multitasking, I really would have to see that. Really have to see it, because it's really not that productive. It's actually very counterproductive. So what ashwagandha does is it helps to create a little more leptin sensitivity and helps the leptin levels. And this can help for weight loss. But what it does is it helps sedate our hunger issues. So in this country, we tend to eat 200% more food than we actually need. 200%. And this is the average person. This isn't even people that are extremely overweight. We're talking about probably almost all of us right now eat 200% more food than we actually need. That's pretty significant when we're talking about weight gain and weight issues. Stress definitely causes weight gain, but most of us, what do when we get stressed out? We eat, right? I'm the opposite. So when I get stressed out, I don't eat. I will stop eating completely. I'm on the opposite end of that, usually because I forget. So it's a little bit different for me. But most people, when they get stressed, they eat. And what do they eat? Stress causes the release of hormones that make us go into fight or flight to protect us, to preserve our life from dying. Back in the day, the hardest things to get a hold of were fats and proteins and simple sugars. So they were a delicacy to be able to have fats and simple sugars. So what are the first things we usually crave? Fats and simple sugars, because our body goes into its reptilian mind, back to that very primitive thing of what is the quickest, fastest energy for me? Fat and sugar. So it's kind of interesting when you see kind of the snowball effect of what happens when stress happens. Ashwagandha, there's other things that other Western drugs that are similar to ashwagandha. Metformin is one of them. And it's because they kind of do the same thing for longevity. So just make sure if you're going to take ashwagandha that it doesn't have any counters. It's a very safe herb of pretty much all the herbs. There's a couple of them that are kind of like, don't take that with certain things. Ashwagandha is pretty safe. If you have any questions, you can always ask me, or of course, ask your doctor, any of those things. But yeah, I think that's where I'm going to cut it off. So anyway, thank you.